Croeso i'r Cadeirlan Bangor. Welcome to Bangor Cathedral, this ancient place which today lies at the heart of a modern and busy city. Visitors come here, and some of them come to see the ancient stones. Some of them come to worship, some come to be silent and still, and in that silence to ask the big questions of life, questions about God. I've come here today to see if we can find some clues about how we might answer some of those questions. This is the Mosque in Christ. It depicts the moments shortly before the death of Jesus. The pained, wearied expression on the face. The body brutalised and then brutalised some more. It's hardly the kind of impressive talisman one would expect in a faith that has attracted millions of followers. The Gospels tell us how all of this happened.
At noon the sky became extremely dark. The darkness lasted 3 hours. At 3 o'clock, Jesus groaned out of the depths, crying, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you abandoned me?" Some of the bystanders who heard him said, "Listen, he's calling for Elijah." Someone ran off, soaked a sponge in sour wine, put it on a stick and gave it to him to drink, saying, "Let's see if Elijah comes to take him down." But Jesus, with a loud cry, gave his last breath. At that moment, the temple curtain ripped right down the middle. When the Roman captain standing guard in front of him saw that he had stopped breathing, he said, "This has to be the Son of God." There were women watching from a distance, among them Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of the younger James and Joseph, and Salome. When Jesus was in Galilee, these women followed and served him, and had now come up with him to Jerusalem.
As Christians pondered this, they realised there was much more to it than met the eye. Somehow God was present in this brutal killing. Somehow God was reaching in and through to others who had been brutalised. Somehow God was bearing in Jesus agonies that were not his own. And somehow that this wasn't the end of the story either. On the first day of the week, while it was still dark, some women came to the tomb, to the place where Jesus' body had been laid. To a place like, well, this. But if there's one thing that they didn't expect to find, it was that the tomb was empty.
At the crack of dawn on Sunday, the women came to the tomb carrying the burial spices they had prepared. They found the entrance stone rolled back from the tomb, so they walked in. But once inside, they couldn't find the body of the Master Jesus. They were puzzled, wondering what to make of this. Then, out of nowhere, it seemed, 2 men, light cascading over them, stood there. The women were awestruck and bowed down in worship. The men said, "Why are you looking for the living one in a cemetery? He's not here, but raised up. Remember how he told you while you were still in Galilee that he had to be handed over to sinners, be killed on a cross, and then, in 3 days, rise up."
Now, there have been some really elaborate attempts to explain all of this. Some have argued the disciples stole the body and then made up the stories about his appearances, even though they knew it was all a bit of a hoax. Some have argued that the Romans or others stole the body, although quite why you might want to steal a cold corpse isn't clear. Others have said, well, what happened is that Jesus actually didn't die. He fainted, and then he revived in the tomb and pushed the stone aside and stepped out, the loss of blood and the hole in his side notwithstanding. The trouble with all of these is that they don't really fit. If it was the Romans or others who stole the body, then why didn't they just simply produce it when the disciples claimed to have seen him alive? And what about the disciples themselves? Do these sound like people who'd go to their deaths knowing that it was all just a hoax, a joke? And so when some people claimed to have seen him, to have encountered him, things got just a lot more interesting. The Gospels tell us that the risen Jesus, now freed from the normal rules of life, did meet with his disciples and with others on a number of occasions. One of them was on a beach, just like this.
When the sun came up, Jesus was standing on the beach, but they didn't recognize him. He spoke to them and said, "Good morning. Did you catch anything for breakfast?" They answered, "No." He said, "Throw the net off the right side of the boat and see what happens." They did what he said, and all of a sudden there were so many fish in it, they weren't strong enough to pull it in. Then the disciple Jesus loved said to Peter, "It's the Master." When Simon Peter realized that it was the Master, he threw on some clothes, for he was stripped for work, and dived into the sea. The other disciples came in by boat, for they weren't far from the land, 100 yards or so, pulling along the net now full of fish. When they got out of the boat, they saw a fire laid with fish and bread cooking on it. Jesus said, "Bring some of the fish you've just caught." Simon Peter joined them and pulled the net to shore, 153 in total, and yet even with all those fish, the net didn't rip.
Easter is a great time of year, the start of spring, a holiday break. But if the events that we've been talking about have any kind of credibility, it has to be about much more than that. If Jesus was raised, then it means that God has shown us in human form that love, his love, is strong, stronger even than death. It means that despite life's uncertainties, that our lives can be graced with something sure and eternal. It means that the big questions have been prized open like that empty tomb, that God has not been content to sit on the fringes of life. And it means most of all that you and I can know Jesus ourselves. That's what Easter is all about.